All right, we're talking with Jeff Slaughter, who is a missionary in Europe, music ministry there. And last time we were talking, we got him to Belgium, up to Brussels, because of one small meeting. And in the meantime, he and I have talked about some choke points, some little bitty things, that one little bitty thing that happens that changes your whole life. You know, you think about the Ethiopian eunuch. Here he's minding his own business, and he sees a guy hitchhiking, and he stops and picks up the hitchhiker. And it's Philip who changes not only the life of the Ethiopian eunuch, but 300 years later, when the church in Jerusalem finally made it down to Africa, they found a church already functioning, growing in Ethiopia, and they think it was because of that Ethiopian eunuch. Look at what picking up one hitchhiker did, not just to a man, but to an entire nation. It changed an entire nation because of one small event. And so by one small event, you got up to Brussels. What year did you move up to Brussels?
We moved to Brussels in the summer of the year 2000, August of 2000.
Okay, so you had just lost your dad.
Yeah.
You had been home.
We survived Y2K.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. The other time that all the toilet paper and bottled water was bought up. Yeah.
We were in France during Y2K, but we survived. We made it through there. Yeah.
You know what happened after Y2K? 2001.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? It just keeps going. But anyway, okay, you got up to Brussels,
yeah,
and you got hooked up with the, what is the name of that church up there?
Brussels Christian Center.
That's it. Yeah. You got hooked up with them. Did they come looking for you, or did you go looking for them?
Well, I showed up there, and they were a church without a worship pastor.
Okay.
And the pastor was on furlough, but came back in the fall. I'd already been asked to serve at a couple of different, in the morning service and in the French service. And the pastor came back and began talking to me about serving as the worship pastor of the church. At that time, we had several people who were capable of leading worship, but they were all involved in ministries where their time was committed, to other things where they couldn't oversee the whole ministry.
Okay.
And so the pastor asked me to take the lead on it, and that was, late 2000, early 2001 when I started that. But it was a place. It was the situation of me just being there, and there was an opportunity to serve. Obviously, God orchestrated that.
Right.
The timing was right, and I started serving there in 2000, 2001, and pretty much served there consistently until 2014.
Wow.
I took 1 year where I was in Paris for every Sunday for a year, helping a church start there. But other than that, I was involved in that church for 14 years.
So the steps of a righteous man really are ordered of the Lord, aren't they?
They are. They are.
And another verse that I really like, it says, "Our word's a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." He did not line out for you what you would be doing in 2014 and 1995. Is that when you went over there?
98.
98. Okay, 16 years later, he did not line it. And his word's a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. And we think of our flashlights and our lanterns and everything that we have now. And you have flashlights that can shoot a beam 5 million miles, and you can see into the next county. But the lamp that they had was this tiny little oil lamp that burned just a tiny little wick. And they had to hold it down so they could see the next step. And God wasn't showing you about that curve that's coming up there 16 years later. All he was showing you was the next step. And your responsibility was step into the next step.
Right. That was it. And so that's what we did. And that next step was, laying a foundation, to serve as a worship pastor of this church, which happened to be an international church.
Okay.
I guess the way we look at churches in missions or in Europe is that they're either national or they're international.
Okay.
Or they can also be, how would you term that? I'll have to come up with the term for that. But we also have churches in Europe and other parts of the world that are Filipino, Chinese, Congolese. They're based around
expat
Yeah,
churches.
they're expats, but
Okay.
they're in a third culture. It's like a third culture church in a sense. So it's a
Okay.
very interesting. You don't think about this. We don't think about this in America because we all just kind of go to church and we don't think about the international aspects. But once we got to Europe and began to understand what was happening there, it was a whole new world in a sense, because basically, because of the changes in Europe, the European Union had been formed and was really the euro came into being while we were there in the year 1999 2000.
Wow.
The countries began to transition from their national currencies to the euro.
Let me
And
ask you this.
yeah,
I'll ask you two questions here. First off, what did that do to your support? What did the transition to the euro do to your
well,
support?
at the point that it happened, it was equal um, because they basically traded the Belgian franc for the euro, and they did it on even par. So I
Okay.
think at that point it was 40 Belgian francs equal 1 euro. And so when they basically did it, it was an equal thing.
Okay.
Um, it was kind of neat to be part of that history.
And what
And the
happened
euro,
a few years? Go
well,
ahead.
I
I'm
was going
sorry.
to say the euro was much easier to understand than the Belgian franc,
Oh,
um, because the euro was more aligned with the system that we use here in the States, the dollar system.
okay. And what happened a few years later when
Yeah,
to support? Yeah.
yeah. So when we first started using the euro, if you took out $1,000 out of your bank account in the States, or 1,000 euros, it cost you $900. Um, so what happened several years later was the U.S. economy was bad again, and the euro rose in strength. And so what that looked like was that same 1,000 euros cost $1,600.
Okay.
So our cost of living went, way up. If it costs you 3,000 euros to live, to pay your rent, to buy your gas and food and all that stuff that we did, then what would have cost you $2,700 was now costing you 5,400, something like that.
Wow.
Something, yeah, 50 over $5,000, and that went on for probably a year. It was up and down, but it was really hard for everyone. It sent some missionaries home. The math never worked. I stopped trying to make the math work because I never could. We just stayed.
Wow.
And I honestly don't know how we were able to stay, pay our bills, and take care of everything, but we did. And we got through that, and things never went back to an even par. There's still not an even par, but it's better now than it was, back in the late, the 2007, 2008, at that time.
I remember there was one period of time where just in a matter of days or weeks, there was a 33% shift, which meant you guys had a 33% pay cut
Yeah.
in a matter of weeks. And as Christians in America who support missions overseas, we need to be reminded of the fact that our missionaries are suffering adversely because of that economy. We've got to remember them when our economy's tanking.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, these things affect, these things affect you they affect you depending on where you are. And so if you're in Africa or the third world country, maybe in South America, the effect is not as bad generally because the cost of living is so much lower.
Okay.
In Europe, the cost of living is high. Taxes are high. Gas was like $6, $7, $8 a gallon. So we were complaining over here when it got above $2,
Yeah.
and over there it was a lot more. So, but again, it was just knowing we have a call and
Yeah.
just hanging on. Not really understand how things were going to work out, not really knowing that they did. We survived. We did.
So when you were at Christian Center there in Brussels, did they really take you on as people to minister to? Were they kind to you, and did they take care of you spiritually?
Yeah, they did. It was a wonderful time for our family. We had great support there through the missionary community. In fact, the interesting thing is the church is actually an Assembly of God church.
Okay.
Um, but they didn't really wear that label on their sleeve in the sense because overseas denominations don't tend to matter as much
Right.
because there's fewer Christians, and so you tend to just find a good Bible preaching church that and if you have kids, you want one that ministers to families as well. And so at our church, we had everyone there from Baptists to Pentecostals. It didn't really matter. In fact, the Southern Baptist missionaries worshipped at our church.
Wow.
They came. I know you wouldn't find that normally.
Yeah, you can't sign the NAM paper and get away with that one.
They came on Sunday mornings.
Wow.
And then they went and picked up refugees from the refugee centers and brought them back. And we had a joint service that afternoon. That's one of the exciting things that happened during those early years, is that we had a huge ministry to refugees that were coming from different countries,
Wow.
such as Iran, Russia, some places in Africa. There were Sundays that we would baptize, 40 people at a time. I mean, they would be lined up in the front row, in the front of the church. Most of them dark-skinned, most of them Iranians.
Wow.
Who had left their country for a variety of reasons, had met the Lord in Brussels and been ministered to. And we saw a lot of lives change those years. And we're part of a refugee service every Sunday afternoon for probably 3 years called Open Door.
Wow.
And that was an amazing time for us to be involved with. And it was just one of many things that happened during our time in Brussels.
That was a veritable day of Pentecost there on a running basis.
And what I was going to say a while ago was that we were coming into Europe at a time where the borders had been dropped between countries. You could now go easily without having to show your passport between countries. And what we were seeing was that Europe was becoming internationalized, and the internationals who moved there were becoming Europeanized. And so there was this cross-cultural thing going on.
Wow.
That we didn't really understand at the time, but it paved the way for what we call international churches, where basically you can, if you go to a national church, you're going to have to speak the national language and merge into the national culture. Sometimes that is difficult for an expat or someone coming from somewhere else, not just American, but Filipinos, Chinese, Africans, South Americans, because their culture is so different than the national culture. Sometimes they're not welcome. Unfortunately, sometimes national churches don't welcome the outsider because they're different and they just don't fit. But an international church provides a third culture where anybody can basically come in and feel comfortable. And so at Christian Center, we had up to 80 different nations represented on any given Sunday.
Wow.
And we would have people stand up, and those who visited would stand up and give their name and what country they were from.
Wow.
And what that did was it opened the door then for after the service, people would go to that person. Let's say you had somebody visiting from South Africa. So the South Africans in the church would go to that person, introduce themselves, and get to know them. And so we saw that happen. That's how we drew people in, because the countries they were from established a way for people to develop relationships and enter into the church.
Wow, that is amazing.
It really is, and still is, an amazing dynamic that's happening throughout Europe.
Let's end with this, and then in future ones I can pick up from here to get to what you're actually doing in Europe.
You're
actually doing, because we still haven't gotten to that. But you and I were standing in the square in Brussels 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was filled with people. And you told me a statistic of what percentage Christian they are in Belgium. Do you remember what that statistic was?
I want to say probably told you something like less than 1%, maybe less than 3%, something like that.
You told me less than 1%.
Yeah.
And we started looking at the hundreds of people in that square. Do you remember that? Yeah. And just allowing the gravity of that if there were 1,000 people in that square, then statistically there were 10 who knew Jesus.
Yeah.
990 of them had no clue of who Jesus was, and just the tragedy of that. Someone said, I have a quote in my phone that said, Europe does not need another Christian movement. Europe needs an encounter with God.
Yeah.
And you are working in the middle of that.
Today, Europe is sometimes called the new dark continent.
Okay.
There's been a great evangelical moves, evangelistic moves in South America, in Africa, even in China. We know there's a huge underground church in China and other parts of Asia. But Europe is a place where that hasn't happened since the Great Awakening a long time ago.
Wow.
The European culture has moved away from God. It's basically secular. The Catholic Church is the largest church represented in Europe, but most people are Catholic by culture, not by conviction.
Okay.
And most Catholic churches are empty these days. Some are even being purchased and bought for other reasons.
What is the lady's name who works there at the seminary in Brussels? The main lady that got us.
Debbie Wilcox.
Yeah, Debbie.
Wilcox, yeah.
She told us that when she went to Brussels and hired a language tutor,
yeah,
that the language tutor came in and said, "So what are you doing here?" And she said, "We're Christian missionaries." And the tutor said, "You mean they're still doing that?"
Yeah. Yeah. People they don't think they need that,
Right.
So we try not to use the word missionary. When I talk about what I do, I'll say I'm a music pastor, that kind of thing. Because missionary does have a negative connotation in a lot of places. It's kind of a colonial expression, that
Okay.
people think you're just coming over here trying to force some cultural belief down our throats. And so,
living in Utah, the word missionary has its own connotation. So we have had to be careful with the use of that word.
Yeah,
also.
Exactly. It's amazing the where words can take you. So you do have to choose your words carefully.
Campus Crusade for Christ has changed the name of their ministry. Did you know that?
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah.
What's
they have changed it to CRU. CRU.
I think I knew that, but I didn't know why.
What is CRU short for?
Crusade.
Yeah, you don't want to talk about the Crusades in Europe.
No, you don't.
with some of the cultures that CRU is working with, you don't want to be talking about the Crusades. So they had to change their name. There's a lot of that going on with denominations, with local churches changing the name to not broadcast their affiliation, which they can still maintain the affiliation, but to engender a broader appeal.
Yeah.
Well, brother, listen, I appreciate you visiting with us, and we're going to pick up here and next time and move more into what you're doing and how you are ministering and training worship leaders from all over Europe with what worship is, how to be excellent in worship with the resources that they have. Churches here, if you need a splitter, if you need a video card, if you need a whatever, well, we're just going to run it down to Performance Audio and pick that up for you. Churches there don't have that.
No.
And so you are training people how to be worshipers and worship leaders with the resources they have at hand. Are any of them still using overhead projectors?
There are probably some who are. I don't know. I have not encountered those in a while, but when we first got to Europe, that was the mode of projection.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But I'm just so thankful for what you're doing. We'll pick this up another time.
Thank you, Robert.
Thanks, brother.